Dune Part 2 is finally here and had a massive opening weekend, but is it enough for the movie to actually be profitable for the studio? Maybe. I only say that because it is the opening weekend after all. It could just be everyone was so excited to see it. They come out to watch it on the opening weekend and then no one comes and sees it afterwards. But I'm thinking there's going to be some legs underneath this. Maybe not like a crazy amount, but I think it's going to be more comparable to what we saw with the last movie. And even if it does kind of fall in line with what the last movie did, I think it will be financially successful for the studio. But let's kind of dive into the numbers a little bit more and see what they have to say about it. Denis Villeneuve's sequel, sporting an A-list cast led by Timothée Chalamet and Zendaya, opened to an estimated $81.5 million in North America this week and double the first film and the biggest opening of the year to date. I don't think it's that impressive that this is the biggest opening movie of the year to date because, it's only March and there hasn't really been any movies that came out this year so far of note. But what is impressive is this is the biggest opening movie since Barbenheimer was released last summer. Dune 2 is likewise whipping up a sandstorm overseas, where it opened to $97 million from 71 markets for a global start of $178.5 million. I should also point out in this article, it does say that it hasn't opened up in China yet. It's going to be doing that next week, and then it'll be opening up in Japan the week after that. So we still got those markets to factor in too. The big question on everyone's mind first and foremost is whether this movie's good or not. I made my review yesterday, but I actually enjoyed the movie if you want to check that out. But next is whether the movie is going to be successful or not. And I'm thinking, looking at these numbers, it's a strong possibility. Now, I'm not necessarily saying it's a guaranteed thing because they spent around $190 million making this movie. And while I think the budget was well spent for this one, that still is a big hurdle that they have to get over. And even though this start is promising, it's still no guarantee at this point. One thing that really is helping with this movie, though, is the word of mouth surrounding it. Because for Dune Part 1, it had an A- cinema score, which is actually a pretty good score. But this one does have an A cinema score. And you can see this reflected in other review aggregate sites as well. We got Rotten Tomatoes right here for Dune Part 1. And you can see pretty good score, 90% for audiences, 83% for critics. But you jump over to Rotten Tomatoes for Dune Part 2, and it's a 95% for audiences and 93% for critics. So this is better received than Dune Part 1 was. But it's not like I'm saying Dune Part 1 was hated or anything like that. It's just that audiences seem to like the second one a little bit more than the first one. And I kind of feel the same way too. I like the second one a bit more than I like the first one, but it's not by a huge margin, but still I enjoyed the second one more. Trying to look at the numbers for Dune 1 as kind of a point of comparison because I think that's a fair way to try to gauge what we can expect from Dune Part 2. You can see this one was able to generate $41 million or just over that domestically during its opening weekend. And in total, it brought in, according to this, just under $435 million globally, which it seems like a lot, but you factor in the budget for this, it really didn't do too well with the budget of $161 million. This probably needed to make maybe closer to $500 million in order to break even. So it fell just shy of that, but still the studio was happy enough with it where they greenlit it for a sequel. And that's why we got Dune Part 2. But when you actually look at what happened with Dune Part 2, $81 million or $81.5 million domestically during its opening weekend. So significant improvement, roughly double what the first one did. So, I mean, I would almost think like you could probably just double this if you're going to just do like a direct comparison. So around $860 million if you just double the global take for the first one and just kind of extrapolate that for the second one. But I don't know. I mean, that's not necessarily the fairest comparison, but I think that's one way you can look at it. And if it did make over $800 million, then that would be a good sign for this. And it definitely would be profitable because this movie is a little bit more expensive than Dune Part 1. So they probably need around $600 million at a minimum in order to just break even. But I'm also looking at other things too, like the early projections for this movie, because these are the long range projections. This came out, when was it? February 1st. So about a month before the movie was released. And it was gauging it to be around $50 to $75 million domestically during its opening week. And what we saw having it around $81.5 million means it was around 8% better than what the projections were speculating. So you can kind of factor that into the domestic total range that it has here, so 8% better than that would probably be around $210 million. I'm not really doing the math on it. That's just kind of quickly. So about $210 million that you can expect from this domestically. Then kind of going back to Dune Part 1, where is that? Here it is. So with Dune Part 1, its domestic share was around 25% of its total box office gross. So $210 million, if that's the domestic take for Dune Part 2, and then you're able to kind of figure that's a quarter of what they can expect, and they should be able to make 75% of their box office total overseas, then that would put this around $840 million that Dune Part 2 can make. So again, kind of close to if you were just to double this, but again, this is just pure speculation at this point. There's really no way of actually knowing what this is going to actually make. And maybe what next weekend, when we see kind of what the drop off is, then we get a better idea what we can expect from this. But as of right now, $178.5 million globally during its opening weekend. That's really good for it. And as long as it continues on this line, I think it could be profitable. But again, we just don't know until we get more information. But one last thing I think is kind of interesting, the point, because like I was saying at the start of this video, this is the biggest opening since Barbenheimer, when that was released last summer. And take a look at what Oppenheimer made during its opening weekend. So about $82.5 million domestically during its opening weekend. And that was able to bring in $960 million globally. So I don't know, maybe it could be following along this trajectory, and it could be flirting with that $1 billion mark. Right now, I'm not saying that it'll hit $1 billion, but I wouldn't bet on it to actually hit the $1 billion mark. At the same time, though, if this movie did actually hit $1 billion at the box office, I wouldn't be surprised by that at all. But right now, though, if it also just stops around $600-700 million, I really wouldn't be surprised by that either. So there's just really no telling. But right now, it's just very good for Dune Part 2. But let me know what you think about all this in the comment section below. Do you think that this movie will actually be successful for the studio and we'll get a third one? Or do you think this is just probably the end of the Dune franchise? And also, if you haven't already, make sure you click that subscribe button if you want to stay up to date with the latest in entertainment news. And if you can too, click that like button and share the video, because it really helps out with the channel. Thank you.